Hello and welcome back to Nelly's Nerd Cave, and we're continuing with a look into the different older types of processors with modern gaming technologies. Hello and welcome back to Nelly's Nerd Cave, and this week what we're looking at is the i7-3770k. This might be the K SKU and I might be able to overclock, but unfortunately my motherboard doesn't support overclocking. This is a socket 1155, it runs at 3.5 GHz and has a maximum TDP of 77 watts. This is 4 cores and 8 threads and still holds the 22nm technology. Again, just like its predecessor the i5, this was released in 2012 and is a 12-year-old processor. As with all my videos, what I'm going to start with is the stuff that stays the same. So first of all, we're looking at the Kioxia Xperia 480GB 2.5-inch SSD. Like the previous videos, if you want to find out more about this, have a look at the previous ones. We're also using this same 16GB of RAM. So it's 16 GB in total, but this is the Kingston value RAM. This is DDR3, it's two 8GB sticks and each one runs at 1600 MHz. Again, something else that's going to stay the same is the CPU cooler. This is the Thermalright Assassin King 120mm fan. It's an air cooler. It has 5 copper heat pipes, and this is a really great cooler and says it can do up to 190 watts TDP. So with this processor, I'm going to pair it with this motherboard right here. This is the Intel desktop board DH61WW. This is from around 2011. And this is one of the very few boards I could get my hands on, so this is going to have to make do for the second and third gen iCore processors. The monitor I'll be using this week is this one, which I always use, which is the MSI G271. This is a 27-inch 145Hz 1080p gaming monitor. And like I've said in all my previous videos, I am using this particular video because at this time of filming, the Steam hardware survey was reporting that most people still gamed at 1080p. So I thought it was only fair that I test all these particular things with 1080p in mind. With all my tests, I'm using the same 3 graphics cards. I'm first of all using this. This is the MSI GTX 970. This is the gaming 4G version, which basically means it's got 4 GB of RAM. This is GDDR5 and it has a clock speed of 1253 MHz. This is PCIe generation 3, but it was released in 2014. The second card that I will be using is this GTX 1650. This is the Palette Game Pro Overclocked Edition. Again, this has 4 GB of RAM, but this is GDDR6, so a step up from the GDDR5. It runs at 1410 MHz, is still a PCIe generation 3, but this card was released in 2020. I use this card predominantly because a lot of the gaming machines that I see are either a 1650 or a 1660. My local PC World that I tend to go to get some parts from still sells these with 12th generation i3s, and they're classed as gaming computers. This has 4 GB of RAM and sometimes it does struggle depending on the game, but it does work well with 1080p. The final card that I'll be using is this one. This is the MSI RTX 3060. This is the Ventus 2X 12 GB edition. This is 12 GB of GDDR6. So again, another step up in speed and performance. It runs at 1807 MHz and this one is PCIe generation 4 and was released in 2021. So now we know all the parts, let's get to the build. So now all the tests are completed. Looking at the GTX 970 with 3D Mark Time Spy, we have around about 20 to 25 frames per second, and the CPU usage is around 30%. When we look at the scores, we have a score of 35 and 18, which is below its average of 37 and 4. But if we look at the previous processors, like the i5 and the i3, it's 4% better than the i5, 16% better than the i3, with the i5 scoring 3371 and the i3 scoring 2969. So overall an improvement just by upgrading the processor. Into Doom Eternal now, and we have a frame rate of between 40 and 61. It's not much of improvement compared to the i5, but looking at the CPU usage, that is an improvement, as in this run we have a 60% usage, whereas within the i5 it was 97% usage. So again, an improvement overall. Now moving on to the 1650, again 3D Mark Time Spy, we have a frame rate between 15 and 26 with a CPU usage of 40%. When we look at the final score, we can see that we have a 3450, which again is less than its average, but this could be due to the OBS in the background as its capture, but its average is supposed to be 35 and 12, so we're not too far off. If we compare this to the i5 and the i3, it's 5.4% higher than the i5, which was 3266, and it's about 13% higher than the i3, which was 3022. So having the 3770k is a vast improvement overall in gameplay. Now we Doom Eternal, we can see that we have a frame rate between 46 and 65, which is the same as its i5. Now the difference between this and its i5 is that we can see that the CPU usage here is down a bit to 71%, whereas on the previous run with the i5 it was 95%. So again, a nice improvement overall. Okay, so into our final card, the RTX 3060, we can see that on 3D Mark Time Spy we have a frame rate between 48 and 60 FPS, and the CPU is utilized at 49%, which is around about the same as the i5. Now when we move into the scoring, we have a 6699, which is less than its average of 7492, but if we look at the i5 and the i3, it's 11% better than the i5 at 60 and 12, and it's 46.3% better than the i3 at 4178. So adding that 3770k has improved the scores on 3D Mark Time Spy tremendously. With Doom Eternal, what we can also see is we can see a massive increase within frame rates. We have between 105 and 131 frames per second. Compare that with the i5, which only had 81 frames per second, and we've got a big jump there. Also, the CPU usage is down to 90%, which shows that the i7 is actually able to keep up with throwing the data at the card to get the relevant graphics on the screen. So all in all, a fantastic improvement. Well, that was a little bit of a surprise for me. Looking at these scores, we've vastly improved on the i3, which was covered in an earlier video, as well as on the i5, again in another earlier video. This goes to show that just upgrading to an i7, such as the 3770k, even though I'm not using the overclocking within this, because my motherboard doesn't support overclocking, just goes to show that having that i7 can improve your gameplay and increase your frame rates tremendously. So would I want to purchase one of these for gaming? Well, potentially yes, this is quite a good platform to utilize. However, I would get it with a motherboard where I can use the overclocking function, purely and simply so that I can get more bang for the buck, as it were. I'd get a bigger CPU cooler to dissipate the heat much easier and much faster. But in all, the 3770k is a fantastic processor for somebody starting out in the big wide world of gaming, especially when it comes to using 1080p. As you saw with my monitor, 144 Hz, it can easily handle it, and the 1080p quality was absolutely fantastic. A lot of the Facebook ads that I see, again, selling the third generation processors, come in pre-built by Dell or HP in the optiplexers and things like that. These aren't designed for gaming. These are actually designed for desktop approaches using Word, Excel, etc. But if you were to get something off the shelf like that, that's great. If you want to game, you could go into the custom build side of things and be able to purchase the separate motherboard, processor, etc. and get quite a good gaming experience on 1080p. So if you like what I've done, don't forget to like, subscribe and hit that notification bell below for more nerdy content. And if you'd like to support me, follow the link below and buy me a coffee. And until next time, keep exploring the world of tech. See you later.